There is a kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. Lorne Beckett knew that kind better than most. He had learned it slowly, over years, in the particular way that grief teaches things. Not all at once, not with a clear lesson, but in accumulations. A Tuesday morning when he reached for the wrong coffee mug, a Sunday afternoon when he forgot, for exactly 4 seconds, that Claire wasn't coming home. Those 4 seconds, and then the remembering. That was the kind of tired he meant. He was 41 years old, and he worked out of a mid-sized automotive repair shop on the edge of Barrie, Ontario, a place called Crestline Auto that smelled permanently of oil and rubber and the particular cold that came in off Georgian Bay in November. He had worked there for 11 years. He was, by any reasonable measure, very good at what he did. The owner, a man named Don, who wore the same Timberland boots every day from September through April, said once that Lorne could diagnose an engine problem by listening to it the way a doctor listens to a chest. Lorne had accepted this without comment. He didn't think it was a special skill. He just paid attention. He had always paid attention. His daughter, Abby, was 7 years old and had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of going very still when she was thinking hard about something. She would sit at the kitchen table after school and work through her homework, with a focus that seemed almost alarming in a child, and Lorne would watch her from the doorway and feel, simultaneously, proud and sad and grateful in proportions he could never quite sort out. She called him Dad in a way that still sometimes caught him off guard, as though the word still sounded a little too large for the room they were in. They had a routine. It was the kind of routine that builds itself slowly out of necessity, out of the particular gravity that two people create when they only have each other to come home to. Lorne dropped Abby at school by 8:15, made it to Crestline by 8:40, worked until 6, picked Abby up from the after-school program, came home, made dinner. Pasta, mostly. Sometimes roast chicken. Abby had gone through a phase of wanting breakfast food for dinner that had lasted most of last spring, and Lorne had made a great deal of scrambled eggs without complaint. He didn't mind. It was easy to accommodate a 7-year-old's preferences when they were the only person in the house with preferences worth consulting. On a Thursday evening in late October, Lorne was not at home making dinner. He was sitting at the bar of a place called The Lamplight on Dunlop Street, nursing a pint of draft he didn't particularly want, waiting for a man named Frank Holloway, who was, as of 7:15, 45 minutes late. Frank was a potential client, a fleet manager for a trucking company out of Innisfil, who had reached out through a mutual contact about subcontracting engine work. Lorne had come in his better jacket, the gray one he kept for occasions that required the suggestion of effort. He had told Abby he would be home by 9. He had arranged for their neighbor, Mrs. Devereaux, to sit with her. He looked at his phone. No message from Frank. He sent a brief, polite text, just checking in, still at the lamplight whenever you're ready, and then set the phone face down on the bar, because looking at it would not make Frank Holloway arrive any faster, and looking at it would only make him feel more like someone who had been left waiting, which he already was. The bar was half full on a Thursday. A television above the counter was showing a hockey game without sound. 2 men in their 50s sat in a booth near the window with pints and the comfortable silence of people who had been friends long enough not to need conversation. A group of younger people occupied a cluster of tables near the back, 3 or 4 couples, the particular noise of people enjoying themselves with a small amount of effort involved. Lorne ordered a second pint he didn't want and looked at nothing in particular. He was about to send Frank a second message, something that said, without saying it, that he was going to leave, when he noticed the couple at the corner table. Not because anything dramatic was happening. Nothing dramatic was happening, which was almost the point. They were sitting across from each other over what appeared to be the ruins of a dinner date. Wine glasses, a shared appetizer plate that had been pushed to the side. The man was speaking. He was perhaps mid-40s, well-dressed in the way that suggests money spent on looking effortless, and he was speaking with a specific quality of self-assurance that Lorne recognized without being able to name immediately. It was the voice of someone who was not asking questions so much as confirming their own answers. The woman across from him was not enjoying herself. Lorne could see this clearly and without any special perceptiveness. She had the body language of someone enduring rather than participating. Her shoulders were angled slightly away. She was holding her wine glass by the stem rather than drinking from it. She nodded at intervals that had nothing to do with what the man was saying. Lorne looked away. It wasn't his business. He had been on a bad date himself, years ago before Claire, and he remembered that the primary sensation was not distress so much as the desire to be elsewhere in a way that couldn't be achieved quickly enough. People got through bad dates. It was an ordinary human experience. He looked back at his phone. Still nothing from Frank. Then the man at the corner table laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that put Lorne's back up before he had consciously decided to be put off by it. Not because it was loud, but because of what it was directed at. The woman had said something quiet that Lorne hadn't heard, and the man had laughed at it in a way that was unmistakably dismissive. A correcting sort of laugh. The kind that means you don't really understand. The woman set down her wine glass. Lorne watched her face for a moment and saw something there that was not quite distress and not quite anger, but was the particular expression of someone deciding whether to continue pretending. He had seen that expression before. He had seen it on Claire in the early months of her illness, when she was deciding whether to tell him the truth about how she was feeling. That was a different context entirely. There was no comparison to be made, but the expression itself was one he knew. He sat with that for a moment. Then he put down his pint, reached for his jacket, and walked across the room. He did not rehearse what he would say. There was nothing particularly rehearsed about it. He simply crossed the bar, arrived at the edge of their table, and waited for the man to notice him. The man noticed him after a beat, an appraising pause, the kind that sizes up without seeming to. Lorne said, calmly and without particular emphasis, that he was sorry to interrupt. He said he was an old friend of the woman across the table, that they had been trying to connect for weeks, and he had spotted her from the bar, and that he was sorry again for breaking in on the evening. He did not look at her while he said this. He looked at the man. He kept his face neutral and his tone easy, the way he talked to customers who came in upset about a repair bill. Not combative, not apologetic, just level. The man looked at the woman. The woman looked at Lorne. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and in that pause Lorne saw her understand exactly what was happening and exactly what he was offering her, and he watched her decide to take it. She said warmly that it was so good to see him. She said she was sorry. She hadn't texted back. It had been a crazy week. She was already picking up her bag from the back of the chair with the practiced ease of someone who had been looking for an exit and had just been handed one. The man said something brief and stiff, something that communicated, without being quite rude enough to address, that he didn't entirely believe this and didn't entirely appreciate it. Lorne held the man's gaze with a steadiness that communicated nothing aggressive and nothing apologetic. Then the man looked at his wine glass, and that was that. Outside, the October air was cold and immediate off the street. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in the way of people who have just passed through something together and are not yet sure what to do with each other. She said, "Thank you," directly, without performance. Not the elaborate gratitude of a moment that wanted to be a scene. Just, "Thank you." Lorne said it was fine. She asked if he had seen the whole thing, meaning from the bar. He said he had seen enough. She nodded. Then she said she was going to call a cab, and she was sorry for whatever his actual evening had turned out to be. He almost laughed. He told her about Frank Holloway, the fleet manager from Innisfil, the 45-minute wait, the second pint he hadn't wanted. She smiled at this, a real one, the kind that arrives unexpectedly. He said he was headed home, anyway. She said goodnight. He said goodnight. She turned in the direction of the corner, and he turned in the direction of the parking lot, and that was all. He didn't think about her after that in any particular way. It had not felt like a significant event. It felt like the kind of small thing a person does when they're paying attention and there's something worth paying attention to. He drove home, paid Miss Devereux, checked on Abby, who was already asleep with one arm hanging off the side of the bed in the manner of a child utterly committed to unconsciousness. He stood in her doorway for a moment, then he went to bed. Frank Holloway texted at 10:30 with an apology about a family situation and a request to reschedule. Lorne replied that it was no problem and meant it. The interview had been arranged through a contact at the Barrie Chamber of Commerce, a man named Ted Garvey, who volunteered on a workforce development committee and had put Lorne's name forward for a position at a manufacturing plant in Stroud called Aldenmore Precision. The plant made components for industrial machinery, complex, high-tolerance work that required kind of mechanical knowledge that Lorne had built up quietly over 20 years, and that most people in the relevant hiring circles did not know how to quantify because it did not come attached to a university credential. He had a diploma from Georgian College. He had 2 industry certifications. He did not have an engineering degree. Ted had been honest with him about this. He said the position, senior maintenance engineer, which was what the job description called it, typically went to candidates with a BA Eng. He said the hiring committee had a preference. He said, also, that Lorne was the most technically capable person he could think of for the work, and that he thought it was worth trying, and that Lorne should go in prepared for resistance. Lorne had said he appreciated Ted saying all of that plainly, and that he would go. He had told Abby about it over dinner, the pasta with the tomato sauce from the jar that she liked better than the homemade version, a fact Lorne had accepted without resentment. She had asked if he would get the job. He had said he didn't know. She had said she thought he would because he knew everything about how things worked. He had said she was biased because she was his daughter, and that was her job. She had considered this and said she was probably biased, but also right. He had not told her about the part where it might not go well. On the morning of the interview, Lorne put on the gray jacket and drove to Stroud in the early quiet of a Friday, past the frozen fields and the still dark tree lines, through the particular silence of a rural highway before 7 in the morning. He was not nervous in the way people usually mean when they use that word. He was alert in the way that comes from not allowing yourself to want something too much while still wanting it. Aldenmore Precision occupied a low, wide building set back from the road behind a parking lot that was already half full when Lorne arrived. The reception area was clean and functional, with a logo on the wall in navy and gray, and a woman at the front desk who gave him a visitor's badge and told him someone would be with him shortly. Someone was with him in 7 minutes. He heard the footsteps in the corridor before he looked up. She was wearing a dark blazer and carrying a folder, and she was looking down at something in the folder as she came through the door from the interior hallway, and then she looked up, and the recognition landed on both of them at the same moment with the particular quality of something that has no neat category. Her name, he would learn in the next 30 seconds, was Meredith Soane. She was the director of operations at Aldenmore Precision. She was, as of this morning, the person conducting his interview. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at her. She said his name, Lorne Beckett, the way a person says a name they are verifying rather than using. He said yes. She extended her hand. He shook it. She said she would take him to the interview room, and they could get started. The interview room was a plain, rectangular space, with a table and chairs and a window that looked onto the side of the building rather than outside, which struck Lorne as an odd architectural choice. Meredith sat across from him and opened the folder and did not refer to it again for the rest of the interview. He noticed this. She had read what was in the folder already. She did not need the folder. It was a different kind of preparation than the kind that required visible notes. She said, "Thank you for coming in." He said, "Thank you for having me." There was a beat. Unhurried. She said, I should tell you that this role is normally filled by candidates with formal engineering credentials, and that the committee has a stated preference for a B.Eng. I want to be upfront about that so you're not walking into something without knowing where the resistance is." He said he appreciated that. He said he had been told as much by Ted Garvey and that he had come in with his eyes open. She said, "Good." Then she said, "I'd like to start with something outside the standard question list, if you don't mind." He said he didn't mind. She said, "Tell me about a time when you saw something that needed to be fixed, and it wasn't your job to fix it." He thought about this honestly and without performing the act of thinking about it. He said there had been situations at Crestline, machines that were technically outside his scope, vendor equipment, loaner tools, that had obvious maintenance issues he'd flagged, even though the work order didn't require it. He said there had been one situation where a hydraulic lift had a slow pressure leak that wasn't on anyone's service calendar, and he had documented it and put it in writing to Don, and Don had said they would deal with it later, and Lorne had dealt with it on a Saturday morning on his own time, because the alternative was someone getting hurt. He said that last part without emphasis. It was just what had happened. Meredith wrote something briefly in the margin of a page in her folder. She asked him about diagnostic process. She asked him about working under time pressure. She asked him about managing a maintenance team, which he had not done formally but had done in the practical sense of being the person in the shop that the younger mechanics brought problems to. He spoke about these things directly and without embellishment. Then she looked at him steadily and said, "I want to ask you something that I'm going to flag as optional." "You don't have to answer it," he said. "Go ahead." She said, "If you had known the other night who I was, what this company was, that I was going to be sitting across from you the following morning, would you have done anything differently?" The question sat in the air between them with the weight of something genuinely asked. Lorne took a moment with it, not because he needed to calculate an answer, but because the question deserved the honesty of an actual moment. He said, "No." He said it was the right thing to do because it was the right thing to do, and the identity of the person it was right for had nothing to do with that. He said he understood why she was asking, and that if he were in her position he would probably want to know the answer to the same thing. She said, "I thought that would probably be your answer." He asked if it was the right answer. She said that was what she had been trying to find out. There was a pause that was comfortable in the way that pauses can be when both people in the room are being straightforward with each other. She said she needed to be honest with him about the credential gap, that there was a formal committee review and she could not make a unilateral decision, and that she would not insult him by making promises she wasn't certain she could keep. She said she would advocate for the technical experience to be weighed seriously and that the final decision would take 2 weeks. He said he understood. He thanked her for her directness. She said, "One more thing." He waited, she said, the evening at the lamplight. "I want to say something about it that I didn't get to say properly on the sidewalk. You didn't make a performance of it. You didn't make it into something it didn't need to be. I've thought about that, and I want you to know that I noticed." He said, "I appreciate that." She said, "I don't usually bring personal observations into professional contexts, but this seemed like the right time to make an exception." He said he thought that was fair. They shook hands again at the door to the reception area. She said she would be in touch through the contact information on file. He said thank you. She turned and walked back down the interior hallway, and he watched her go for the second it takes to watch someone leave, and then he retrieved his visitor's badge from the clip on his jacket and handed it back at the front desk. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting the engine. He was not certain he had the job. That was honest. The credential gap was real, and committees were what committees were, and he had been around long enough not to mistake a promising interview for a guaranteed outcome. He knew that. He was not allowing himself to turn a good conversation into a certainty. But he had been honest in there. Every answer he had given was the true answer. He had not performed a version of himself that was better suited to what the room wanted, because he didn't know how to do that and had never been particularly motivated to learn. What had come out in that room was what was actually there, and if that was not sufficient, then it would not have been sufficient under any circumstances, and there was a particular kind of peace available in that. He picked Abby up from school at 3:15. She came out in her winter jacket with her backpack on one shoulder and her lunch bag in her hand, and she looked at him the way she always did when she was trying to read how things had gone. She said, "Well?" He said, "It went well, I think. We'll know in a couple of weeks." She said, "I told you." He said, "You don't know that yet." She said, "I know enough." He laughed. It was the laugh of a person who has had a better day than they let themselves expect, and she heard it for what it was. And she settled into the passenger seat with the particular satisfaction of a 7-year-old who believes she has been proven right. He took the long way home, the route that went along the lake shore where the trees were bare and the water was the color of pewter in the November light, and Abby looked out the window without talking, which was her way of being content. He turned on the radio low. He drove. 11 days later, on a Wednesday morning when he was under the undercarriage of a 2019 Ford Transit van, his phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He did not check it until he was out from under the van and had wiped his hands on the shop rag. He sat on the rolling stool and looked at the screen. It was an email from the administrative coordinator at Aldenmore Precision with the subject line, Senior Maintenance Engineer, Offer of Employment. He read it through once. Then he read it through again, not because he had missed anything the first time, but because some things deserve to be read twice. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and sat with it for a moment in the noise and the smell of the shop, the radio playing something country from the speaker above the tool rack, Don's boots coming and going across the concrete somewhere in the background. He thought about Claire, the way he still sometimes thought about her, at the moments when he had news she would have wanted to hear first. He thought about Abby, who was currently in school, doing reading comprehension exercises, and who had the wholly unearned confidence of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. He thought about the sidewalk outside the lamplight on Dunlop Street, and the cold air off the street, and the way a good outcome can begin in a moment you almost decided not to pay attention to. He called Ted Garvey. Ted said, "I knew it." Lorne said, "I didn't." Ted laughed. He sent a brief text to Meredith Sowen's work address, the one on the email signature, which was the only contact he had for her, that said, "Thank you for the consideration and for the conversation. I look forward to the work." She replied within the hour. It said, "You earned it. See you on the 15th. That night, Abby wanted breakfast for dinner again, and Lorne made scrambled eggs with cheese and toast on the side, and she ate with the seriousness she always brought to meals, and then she looked up and said she was glad about the new job, because now maybe they could get a dog. He said a dog was a completely separate conversation. She said that was practically a yes. He said it was absolutely not a yes. She cleared her plate, rinsed it in the sink, and walked out of the kitchen with the bearing of someone who has already decided that the dog situation is going to resolve itself in their favor. And Lorne sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and looked at the empty chair across from him, and felt, simultaneously, the quiet weight of everything that had been lost, and the specific, ordinary warmth of what was still here. And those two things did not cancel each other out. They never did. They just sat beside each other, the way they always had, and he sat between them, and that was enough.